March 23rd, 2023 meeting of the State Water Control Board. My name is Heather Wood. Before we begin, I will read a few board meeting rules. For the record, attendees may not erect any signage inside or outside the meeting room or building. Attendees are not entitled to be disorderly or disrupt the meeting from proceeding in an orderly, efficient, and effective fashion. Disruptive behavior may result in a recess or removal from the meeting. Possession or use of any device that may disrupt the conduct of business is prohibited, including but not limited to voice amplification equipment, bullhorns, blowhorns, sirens, and other noise-producing devices, as well as signs on sticks, poles, or stakes, or helium-filled balloons. That's making me remember that I should ask you all to silence your cell phones also. All attendees are asked to be respectful of all speakers. Rules will be enforced fairly and impartially, and not only to ensure the efficient and effective conduct of business, but also to ensure no interface with the business of the complex, its employees, and guests. Attendees wishing to record the proceedings are welcome to do so. However, you may not interfere with the business of the meeting nor impede the view or participation of other meeting attendees and staff. No smoking is allowed unless in a designated outside space. This includes tobacco and e-cigarettes. No alcohol, fireworks, pyrotechnics, weapons, or any substances or items controlled by law or allowed. No firearms are allowed in the state's contracted spaces except for firearms carried by law enforcement officers or authorized security personnel. All violators may be subject to removal from the meeting facility. Anyone removed from the facility may not re-enter. Anyone who fails to comply with the removal may be charged with trespass. So with that, I will ask the board members to introduce themselves, beginning on my left.
Scott Cameron, Fairfax County.
Ryan Seeger, Fairfax County.
Heather Wood, Chairman, Norfolk, Virginia.
Lou Wallace, Southwest Virginia.
Robert Dunn, Chester, Virginia.
Mike Rolban, DEQ Director.
Ross Phillips with the Attorney General's Office.
Thank you. Our first item on the agenda is the review and acceptance of the minutes. Just everyone's had a chance to take a look. Do we have any comments or recommended revisions?
Madam Chairman, I move we approve the minutes as submitted.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Minutes are approved. Thank you. Our next item on the agenda, tab B of the board book, final regulations, reissuance, Virginia Pollution Discharge Elimination System, general permit regulation for discharges resulting from the application of pesticides to surface waters, 9 VAC 25-800. Mr. Sherman.
Good morning. I'm Peter Sherman with the Office of VIPTES Permits. I'm presenting final amendments for the reissuance of the VIPTES General Permit Regulation for discharges resulting from the application of pesticides to surface waters, 9 VAC 25-800. Certainly. This general permit is applicable to operators who discharge to surface waters from the application of biological pesticides or chemical pesticides that leave a residue for any of 5 specified use patterns, including the treatment of mosquitoes or flying insects, excess weed or algae, animal pests, forest canopy pests, or intrusive vegetation. The current general permit expires on February 29th, 2024. On August 11th, 2022, EPA Region 3 indicated they had no comments and thus concurred on the proposed draft general permit. A notice of public comment was authorized on August 25th, 2022. During the comment period, DEQ received one comment in support of renewal of the general permit. A public hearing was held January 11th. No public comments were received at the public hearing. There have been no substantive changes to the general permit since the notice of public comment was authorized. One editorial change has been made. We've added the part number and a heading to Part 1 of the general permit. Overall, the changes to the pesticide general permit are minimal. We've added a definition of pesticide discharge. This language is from EPA's 2021 pesticide general permit. Clarifies that such discharges do not include agricultural stormwater discharges or return flows from irrigated agriculture. We've also clarified the definition of pesticide residue. This language is similarly from EPA's pesticide general permit, helps to clarify when this permit is applicable. The new permit term will be from March 1st, 2024 to February 28th, 2029. And finally, for the animal pest control use pattern, we've added cultural methods to the pest management measures that must be evaluated. Cultural methods are behavioral actions, basically, that support the desired conditions and minimize the conditions that pests need to live. This change also reflects the same change made to EPA's 2021 pesticide general permit. Do any members of the board have questions regarding these changes?
Questions for Peter? Being none, you may proceed with staff recommendation.
Staff recommends that the board adopt the amendments to the Virginia Pollutant Discharge Elimination System general permit for discharges resulting from the application of pesticides to surface waters, 9 VAC 25800, as amended and presented to you today. Staff also recommends that the board affirm that it will receive, consider, and respond to petitions by any person at any time with respect to reconsideration or revision of this regulation as provided by the Administrative Process Act.
Any questions or comments regarding staff recommendation?
Madam Chair, I move to accept the recommendations of staff as just presented.
I second.
Motion's been made by Mr. Seeger and seconded by Mr. Cameron. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Peter. Next item on the agenda, Peter stays with us. Proposed regulations, reissuance of Virginia Pollution Discharge Elimination System, VPDS General Permit Regulation for Non-Metallic Mineral Mining, 9 VAC 25-190.
This time I'm presenting proposed amendments for the 2024 reissuance of the VIPD's General Permit Regulation for Non-Metallic Mineral Mining. This general permit is applicable to 9 sectors of mineral mines, including sand, gravel, stone, and other minerals. These facilities may discharge processed wastewater, pit dewatering, and stormwater. Currently, there are 182 permittees covered by this general permit. This permit includes effluent limits for total suspended solids and pH that are applicable to discharges of processed wastewater and commingled stormwater. It also includes a TSS evaluation value for stormwater-only discharges, and such discharges also must conform with the requirements of a stormwater pollution prevention plan. The current general permit expires on June 30th, 2024. A notice of intended regulatory action was published January 31st, 2022. DEQ received 1 comment and 2 questions in response to that NOIRA. 2 TAC meetings were held, 1 each in August and November of 2022. The primary concern identified by the TAC was the need to add flexibility to allow dewatering after extreme storms that cause flooded conditions in the mining pit. On February 17th, 2023, DEQ sent the proposed regulation to US EPA Region 3. Updated materials were provided to Region 3 on March 9th. An EPA review is currently underway. With regard to proposed changes, we have added a North American Industry Classification System a code requirement and an ownership type information requirement to the registration statement. These are to be consistent with federal e-reporting requirement, electronic reporting requirements. We've revised the representative and substantially identical stormwater outfall language, again, to be consistent with federal electronic reporting requirements and the language in other general permits. We've revised the TMDL special conditions so that it is not limited to stormwater, and for consistency with VIPD's requirements and other general permits, the language in other general permits. We've added language that conditionally allows dewatering during flooded conditions, a new special condition 18. This is in response to comments on the notice of intended regulatory action and input from the TAC. This language provides some additional flexibility, but also includes conditions that are designed to protect water quality. We've added a conditional electronic reporting requirement for registration statements and discharge monitoring reports, again, to meet federal electronic reporting requirements. We've revised language regarding when it is necessary to update the stormwater pollution prevention plan. This is to meet corrective action requirements in the federal multi-sector general permit and similar languages in our industrial stormwater general permit. We've revised 2 authorized non-stormwater discharge provisions to make the language consistent with changes being made to our industrial stormwater general permit. And we've revised the 24-hour non-compliance reporting provision to reflect current practices and updated the web link. The new term of the permit is July 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2029. Other minor changes are discussed in the the THO8 background document. Do any members of the board have questions regarding these changes?
Just one quick question, Mr. Chairman. With respect to the special condition for the conditional dewatering during a flooding event, am I correct in reading that it says that that provision is applicable if you hit a storm that's equal or greater than a 10-year, 24-hour flood storm event?
Yes, that's one of the conditions.
Out of curiosity, is that a baseline in other Office of Water regulations? What was the logic that came up with that as the storm event that this is allowed?
It is specified in federal effluent guidelines that are applicable to non-metallic mineral mining. That effluent guideline identifies dewatering as a separate discharge. It does also address the issue of commingling, but essentially it establishes that any discharge from an impoundment that's designed to contain a 10-year, 24-hour storm is not subject to the effluent limits specified in that guideline. So it is a benchmark used in the federal effluent guideline. Our permit includes a TSS limit, which is not, it's specified for only one category of industry, phosphate mining, under the federal effluent guideline. We had imposed it a number of years ago, generally to be protective of water quality. We've imposed additional conditions here in this language that we're proposing to ensure that water quality remains protected. We've included an alternative limit on TSS and other conditions that will protect against excessive discharge of TSS.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Peter? You may proceed with staff recommendation. Or is there, actually it's proposed, I guess. Oh, you've got one.
This isn't, can you go, next slide, please?
You want this one?
I have it.
You got it? Okay.
Yeah. Staff recommends that the board authorize a public comment period and public hearing for amendments to the Virginia Pollutant Discharge Elimination System General Permit Regulation for non-metallic mineral mining, 9 VAC 25-190. Staff also recommends that the board authorize DEQ to serve as the hearing officer at the public hearing.
Madam Chairman, I move
Mr.
we
Dunn.
adopt staff recommendation.
Motion's been made to accept staff recommendation. May I have a second? Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Our second proposed regulation for today is under tab D in your board book, reissuance of Virginia Pollution Discharge Elimination System General Permit Regulation for stormwater discharges associated with industrial activity, 9 VAC 25-151. Mr. Bryan.
All right, good morning. We're considering the VIPD's general permit regulation for discharges of stormwater associated with industrial activity, 9 BAC 25-151. It expires on June 30th, 2024, and we're at the proposed stage of our normal reissuance process, and we'll be asking that the board authorize a public comment period and hearing for the proposed amendments. Next slide, please. The permit currently covers over 1,200 industrial facilities in the state from a wide variety of industrial activities, which this permit groups into 21 industrial sectors. 790 of those facilities are within the Chesapeake Bay watershed and are subject to the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. Because of the wide variety of industries covered by this regulation, the permit contains both general stormwater pollution prevention plan requirements that apply to all facilities, as well as industry-specific requirements, called sector-specific requirements, that describe any additional SWIP requirements, numeric effluence limitations, or benchmark monitoring requirements that are applicable to each industrial sector. Facilities may also be subject to TMDL requirements, whether that's a local TMDL or the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. This is the first version of this regulation was approved in 2004 and has been updated and reissued every 5 years since. And this is the fourth reissuance of this permit. The notice of intended regulatory action was published April 11th, 2022. We received 4 sets of comments, along with 10 requests for TAC membership. The comments were received from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, the Virginia Association of Municipal Wastewater Agencies, the Virginia Manufacturers Association, and the Virginia Transportation Construction Alliance. Representatives for these organizations were approved as TAC members, and their comments were discussed during the TAC meetings. We had 3 TAC meetings, October 5th, October 25th, and December 1st of 2022, and the result of the TAC meetings are the amendments to the proposed regulations presented to you today. So there are a number of general changes we'd like to start with. First, the definition for measurable storm event has been removed as it no longer appears in the text of the regulation. Sections that previously used that terminology have been modified to now reference a storm event discharge. The Code of Federal Regulations date has been updated. We'll probably have to get updated again when we go final. Permit's effective date and expiration dates have been updated in multiple locations to July 1st, 2024 and June 30th, 2029. There is an updated link to the Pollution Response Preparedness Portal, which has been included, and the language now clarifies that reports outside of working hours should be submitted through that portal. There's a new Section 85, which delineates the beginning of Part 4 of the permit, which is regarding sector-specific requirements. The language in that section is not new. It's just been moved out of Section 90, into the new Section 85 to help mark the beginning of Part 4. So Section 90 through Section 390 are all sector-specific requirements. There is a new Section 400, which delineates a new Part 5 of the permit, and this consolidates all the Chesapeake Bay TMDL requirements into one section to help simplify and streamline the permit. They used to be buried down in, I believe it was Special Condition Number 8 in Part 2 of the permit, so this just pulls it all out into one spot. Changes to these requirements will be noted towards the end of this presentation. There were a couple of proposed changes to the non-stormwater discharges authorized by this permit. These changes are proposed to be consistent with what we have in the MS4 general permit regulation. We added discharges from firefighting training activities managed in a manner to avoid an in-stream impact in accordance with Section 9.1-207.1 of the Code of Virginia. We also clarified that routine external building washdown must also be managed in a manner to avoid an in-stream impact. Next, we have de-icing operations at primary airports. Authorization for coverage of de-icing operations at primary airports was removed in the 2019 permit. These discharges are subject to the federal effluent guidelines at 40 CFR 449, and it was determined at the time that primary airports should be covered under individual 50s permits. However, during the 2019 permit term, there were a handful of primary airports that were covered under this general permit under Sector AD in order to avoid the cost and administrative burden of an individual permit. The proposed amendments clarify that facilities subject to the referenced federal effluent guidelines may be covered under Sector AD. Additionally, we have a new airport de-icing operations condition, which has been added to the general slip conditions in Part 3 of this permit in order to provide control measure options for consideration by airports covered by this permit. The condition is based on language in the 2021 EPA multi-sector general permit and language that we've previously used in this general permit. The registration requirements have also been updated. The first three listed on this slide were added in order to cut down on administrative time. So it's just back and forth between the permittee and the permit writer during the issuance process. There were already things we needed in order to issue the permit. They were just, some of them were in the registration statement, some of them were in the regulation, but not both. So we made sure those were shored up. We also clarified that new MS4 notification is not required with each reissuance of the general permit. Facilities that are required to give an MS4 notification can continue to provide their initial notification when they apply for reissuance. We removed a statement regarding de-icing operations not being authorized by the permit, given that they are. And we added a statement regarding future electronic submission of registration statements following 3 months' notice by the department. Next slide, please. Thank you. Sector-specific benchmark monitoring parameters were reviewed and updated in accordance with EPA's 2021 multi-sector general permit, the Virginia Water Quality Standards, and the recommendations of the Technical Advisory Committee. Benchmark concentrations represent a target concentration for a facility to achieve through the implementation of their stormwater pollution prevention plan. As noted on this slide, benchmarks for aluminum, arsenic, cadmium, lead, and silver were updated to match the 2021 multi-sector general permit. Iron and magnesium benchmarks were removed, given that EPA removed them in their multi-sector general permit based on lack of acute toxicity, and because there are no acute criteria in the Virginia Water Quality Standards for those parameters. And then finally, copper was updated to match the acute criteria in the Virginia Water Quality Standards. We clarified that the TMDL conditions are only applicable to a facility if the TMDL is approved by EPA prior to the term of the permit. This is something we've been adding in all of our general permits. And for facilities that have TMDL monitoring requirements, language was added to clarify that applicable sampling data collected during the 2019 permit term may be used to satisfy all or part of those requirements. And that's for both local TMDLs. We also added this language to the Chesapeake Bay TMDL section we'll talk about later. We also added language requiring facilities that exceed a TMDL waste load allocation to prepare and submit a pollution minimization plan, or PMP, upon notification from the department. Next Next slide. Thank you. All right, before looking at the changes to the Chesapeake Bay TMDL requirements, we have a brief overview here of the current requirements. We thought it might be helpful. So in order to address the 2010 Chesapeake Bay TMDL, starting with the 2014 general permit and continuing into the current 2019 permit, facilities within the Chesapeake Bay watershed were required to submit a demonstration of compliance with the Chesapeake Bay TMDL loading rates. In order to demonstrate compliance, those facilities were required to obtain 4 samples from each outfall using a semi-annual monitoring frequency for nitrogen, phosphorus, and suspended solids. They were then required to calculate their facility loading rates in pounds per acre per year using the calculations provided in the permit or in the regulation and submit those calculations to the department. If their calculated facility loading rates exceeded those of the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, they were to submit a TMDL action plan detailing the means and methods and the schedule by which they would reduce their facility load to comply with the TMDL loading rates. So we just refer to these as reductions. If no reductions were necessary based on their calculations, no further action was required. The TMDL due date is currently December 2025, so the due date for any required reductions was set in the 2014 and 2019 permits as June 30th, 2024, which is the expiration date of this permit, given that it was the closest to the 2025 deadline we had at the time. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is just an update on the current status of compliance among facilities that are registered under the 2019 permit and are within the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and these were updated as of March 9th. So currently, about 19% are working on sampling and submitting their calculations, and this includes facilities that may have only been recently registered. 51% did not require an action plan, so those are those who have sent in their calculations were below the Chesapeake Bay loading rates. And 31% currently have approved action plans, and so they might be at various stages of implementing that plan, but they currently have an approved plan. Next slide, thank you. So moving on to actual changes. While the requirements are generally the same in the proposed 2024 regulation, there are some significant changes to point out. First, the monitoring frequency was changed to quarterly in an effort to meet the December 31st, 2025 deadline in the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. TSS reduction requirements have been removed entirely, and that's in accordance with Virginia's final Phase 3 Watershed Implementation Plan. You might refer to it as WIP 3. Which in turn was based on the recommendations of the 2019 Chesapeake Bay Program Principals Staff Committee. And so you may recall this was also done recently with the MS4 General Permit Regulation as well. Requirements are also now separated into 3 distinct categories, depending on the status of the facility's demonstration of compliance with Chesapeake Bay TMDL loading rates. All right, and this is I believe the final slide here. So facilities that have already demonstrated compliance, so they're done, are to maintain documentation of their demonstration with their stormwater pollution prevention plan and continue implementing any BMPs developed as part of that demonstration. Reductions for existing facilities that are currently registered under the 2019 permit, if they have reductions, they are to achieve them by December 31st, 2025. Reductions for existing facilities that obtain initial coverage under the 2024 permit, again, if they have to do reductions, are to be achieved 2 years following the 4th quarterly monitoring period. As noted earlier, facilities may use applicable sampling data collected during the 2019 permit term to satisfy all or part of their monitoring requirements. And then finally, alternative calculations may be proposed on a case-by-case basis to address facilities with outfalls that rarely discharge. We have a handful of these facilities where the facility just isn't discharging, so they're having a hard time getting their sampling done. So we included this as well. And now I'm on to questions. Are there any questions?
I looked at some of the standards and started wondering how you made the changes that I saw in the back part of our information that you showed how you did most of the changes. How did we determine that the North Carolina standard is one we should use?
That was done by EPA. So originally in the EPA, I want to say it was late 1990s when they came up with their multi-sector general permit. And then we based ours in 2004 off of theirs. So we have essentially copied what they did. at the time because they were grabbing, there's a whole list of about 18 different sources that I counted from where they got all these various benchmarks originally. A lot of them were based on EPA's federal water quality standards, but as you noted, there was a couple from North Carolina. I believe there was one from another state as well. So you can ask them where they where they came up with that. Since then, the majority of them have been modified based on ongoing studies, ongoing information, or monitoring we've gotten in as to what levels are acceptable or not. Changes to water quality standards both at the federal level or at the state level in our case.
So you're saying that the North Carolina standards became EPA standards, and that's why we accepted it?
I don't know if it became an EPA standard as far as water quality standard, but it became the benchmark. I anticipated this question, so hold on a second. Let me find the one that we looked at here. Idaho, by the way, was the other one. Let's see, North Carolina, they had the BOD5 concentration. It came from North Carolina as well as, sorry?
Phosphorus and oxygen were two, I think.
Okay. Yep, that looks right. And let's see, nowadays we've got, here's phosphorus. Phosphorus is now based on, according to EPA, yep, North Carolina. We based ours on the Virginia policy for nutrient-enriched waters, and just happens to be the same.
Question for you on the copper acute criteria. Is that criteria associated with ecological health or human health?
It's acute criteria, so it's aquatic health at that point.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Ryan?
One quick question with respect to the kind of the inclusion of the firefighting training activities as part of the general permit. Obviously, we've had a lot of conversations over the last couple of years about the PFAS situation, and firefighting and PFAS tend to be hand in hand. Was that a specific consideration in terms of, so question is, was that something you were considering and including in this general permit? Is PFAS included within the coverage of the general permit or not?
So firefighting activities was what we currently have in the permit in the 2019. This added the firefighting training activities, and it specifically references that section of the code I mentioned earlier. That section of the Virginia Code specifically prohibits the use of the foams that have PFAS in them for training activities. I believe for emergency activities, it's still allowed, if I remember that correctly, but I'm also not an expert on PFAS, so.
Okay. So the reference to the 9.1.2071 is the exclusion for PFAS as part of the general permit?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for Joseph? There being none, may I have a motion?
Madam Chairman, I move we approve staff recommendation as presented.
You want me
Did
to
I
read it
skip
first?
did I skip staff recommendation? I'm sorry. Let me go back up.
It's okay.
That motion is withdrawn.
Okay.
Or,
All right, I'll go ahead and read it.
Mr. Dunn, I think you have to withdraw it, but staff
All right.
recommendation, please.
Sure,
Joseph.
thank you. Staff recommends the board authorize a public comment period and a public hearing for amendments to the VIPT's general permit for discharges of stormwater associated with industrial activity, 9 VAC 25-151. And staff recommends the board authorize the staff to serve as hearing officer at the public hearing.
Thank you. Now may I have a motion, please? Mr. Dunn. I was ahead too.
I recommend we approve staff recommendation as presented.
Second.
Motion's been made by Mr. Dunn and seconded by Ms. Wallace. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a great presentation. Thank you. We will now move on to other business. Report to the board regarding controversial permits, BPDS number VA 00936165, Camp Blue Ray, OPCO LLC. Mr. Morris.
Madam Chair, members of the board, it's my pleasure to present the controversial permit report for you guys. Next slide. 10.1, TAC 1184, TAC 1, TAC B, or B, point B, The Code of Virginia provides that each regular meeting, we provide this report to you guys. This is the first such report that we've actually had a controversial permit. So it's my pleasure to refresh you guys' memory on what we can and cannot do for the controversial permits. A controversial permit includes a water permitting action for which a public hearing has been granted. This report to you guys is for informational purposes. All actions taken by this would be for the department. And this meets or serves to meet the requirements of 10.1 TAC 1184.1.b of the Code of Virginia. Next slide, please. As you mentioned, this is for VA 0093165, the Camp Luray permit. The draft permit was submitted to on December 8th, 2022. The public comment period started on December 22nd, 2022, and closed on January 23rd, 2023. An informational public meeting was held at Luray Fire Hall on January 19th. 123 commenters requested a public hearing, and DEQ reviewed those requests and deemed a public hearing should be held on February 15th. Next slide, please. On the screen right now is the location of the facility in relation to the state of Virginia and also the neighboring states, so you get a general idea of where it is. Next slide, please. Right here is a screenshot of what was submitted in the draft permit fact sheet to kind of give you an idea of where on the Shenandoah River this is and where the outwall will be proposed. Next slide, please. A summary of the comments for the public hearing. In generality, the Southern Fork Shenandoah River is already impaired, and authorizing an additional discharge will further impair the river. Second general theme was the nutrient trading agreement for the proposed discharge is not protective of local water quality in the South Fork Shenandoah River. The third general theme was the RV resort and campground design characteristics may not have been clearly conveyed, and the design of the wastewater treatment facility needs to be revisited, and that DEQ does not have a technical review process. The fourth general theme was that the wastewater treatment facility will be in the 100-year floodplain. The fifth general theme was, has the applicant considered disposing the wastewater on their own property in a drain field or hauling the wastewater off-site? And the sixth one was, how is compliance at this wastewater treatment facility assessed? Next slide, please. For the public hearing request, DEQ did deem it necessary to have a public hearing, and this would be a controversial permit. A public hearing will be held on April 6th at 6:30 at the Luray High School auditorium, and this is in the community. An informational briefing will immediately precede that hearing for 30 minutes, so from 6 p.m. to 6:30. That hearing will go until 9:30 at night, so it's 3 hours. A summary of the public comments will be mailed at least 20 days prior to the next hearing, and the summary of public comment hearing will be on June 20th. That being said, I'm here to answer any questions you guys have about this process or any of the general themes or concerns with the permit.
Any questions for Scott?
Yeah, a question. Has the county government expressed a position yet on this permit?
I don't believe the county government has expressed a position on the permit. Brandon, do you have a comment for that?
So hello, my name is Brandon Karakoff. I'm the Water Permitting and Compliance Manager in our Valley Regional Office. So the applicant did receive their special use permit from the county. So the county has been involved and granted that special use permit. But as far as taking a position on the discharge permit itself, they have not made a statement there other than to say that they've done their appropriate approvals at the county level.
Any other questions or comments for Scott? Thank you.
Thank you all.
Next item on the agenda is the Mountain Valley Pipeline update.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. have a brief update for you on the Mountain Valley Pipeline. This covers a period of November 30th to 2022 to March 17th, 2023. In regards to the project status, MVP is continuing communication with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the U.S. Forest Service, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to resolve the issues that caused their approvals to be remanded by the Fourth Circuit Court. In regards to construction, presently there are no forward progress activities underway. Construction activities are limited to inspection and maintenance of controls and stabilization measures, and there have been no significant construction-related events or changes to construction activities. Compliance activities have been ongoing. DEQ and its third-party consultants are continuing daily inspections of the project. Since the last board meeting, the department has received no complaints regarding the MVP project, and there have been no findings of noncompliance. The FERC monitors are continuing their inspections of the project and have reported no findings of noncompliance as well. And that's all I have, unless there's any questions.
Any questions for Matt?
I think I do. So help me to understand that we still have there's still open trenches?
I don't believe there are open trenches, John. No
So
open
everything is
trenches.
covered, everything that's in the ground is covered
Correct.
and stabilized?
Yes.
Okay.
They're just monitoring the continuing ongoing stabilization at this time.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Matt? Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Future meeting date, June 22nd.
Yes, the future meeting date is June 22nd, 2023. I will be polling board members so that we can also put probably an August board meeting on your calendar sometime soon.
And do we have anybody signed up for public forum?
We do.
Okay.
We have Ms. Jessica Sims with Appalachian Voices would like to address the board on gold mining and VRP, and she has 3 minutes.
Morning, Ms. Sims, how are you?
Good, how are y'all?
Good.
Thanks for the chance to speak. Just wanted to follow up. I've been sort of bringing up these topics in the public comment forum past couple meetings. Wanted to give y'all an update. The threat of large-scale gold mining in Virginia. So this is something that a state agency committee released a report on at the end of the year, and it led to some legislation related to this issue, specifically the threat of the use of cyanide in the processing of large-scale gold mining. So that's one of the main community concerns. It's not a process that's necessary for the processing. There's other ways in which to do that don't use cyanide. So I just wanted to make y'all aware there was an effort with bipartisan support, HB 1722, which got through committee in the House to ban the use of cyanide in mineral mining processing. It did fail when it reached the floor, but this is going to be an expanding threat. We still have lots of legacy pollution from unreclaimed gold mines along the gold pyrite belt. And we see that the Canadian exploration company Aston Bay is acquiring more and more land along the belt, including 500 more acres in Buckingham County. So ongoing threat. It may come before you if it gets to the regulation stage, so just want to keep you all apprised of that. And to suggest that you ask the state agency committee, which was led by the Department of Energy, to follow up with y'all, provide a copy of their report if they have not done so. It was provided to the legislature, but it would be great for y'all to have that and know the specific threats that our state agencies, including DEQ, assessed from that issue. So flagging another thing that could end up under the controversial permit subject, the Virginia Reliability Project. This is a project that's an expansion of 48 miles of existing pipeline, doubling the capacity through areas in Hampton Roads of significant cultural significance, areas that have recurrent flooding. And so there's great community concern about the actual need for this expansion and the impacts it could have on areas that have significantly changed in terms of population, infrastructure since then. Wanted to make y'all aware there is an open comment period for this project through the Coastal Zone Management Program right now through April 7th. So this is not something that would directly come before y'all, but in some capacity it may down the road, and y'all should at least have as much information available to you as possible. So I would ask that you consider asking the Office of Environmental Impact Review to keep y'all informed, as I'm sure DEQ staff and Director Rolban will too. So additionally, this doesn't leave much time for public comment as folks are just learning about the project, so anything y'all could do to help extend the opportunity for folks to learn about it would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's the only registered speaker.
Okay. Anything you guys want to talk about before I adjourn?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chairman. About a week after our last board meeting in November, the Virginia Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts had its annual meeting in Roanoke, and I just wanted to inform the board that the state association unanimously adopted a policy expressing concern about the water quality impacts of the continuing growth of utility-scale industrial solar in the Commonwealth. And I've provided a copy of that to my colleagues today. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that being said, I will adjourn the March 23rd meeting of the State Water Control Board. Thank you all for coming.